German heavy tanks are not merely machines of war, they are a mirror of German military thought. Today, we will trace the entire evolutionary chain of heavy tank development in the Third Reich, from the clumsy iron shed of the First World War to the 100-ton monsters that could not cross a single bridge. 4 generations of designers, dozens of prototypes, hundreds of thousands of man-hours, all for machines, most of which never even left the factory gates. That is the paradox. So, let's begin. A 7V 1917, the firstborn. 30 tons of armored chaos, a crew of up to 18 men, almost an infantry platoon locked in an iron box. Mobility was a catastrophe. Loose soil, any trench, the slightest incline, and the monster would belly down. But it was here that the German design school received its first lesson. Mount a large caliber gun and ensure all-around fire. A 57mm Caponier gun and 6 machine guns on the sides. An aggressive firepower doctrine that would persist for the next 30 years. Weak, clumsy, but vicious. The Germans remembered this combination. K-Wagen, also known as Grosstraktor, 1918. Here begins what I call the German disease of gigantomania. 120 tons. 120, Karl. 4 77mm guns in sponsons, a crew of 22 men. By the war's end, they managed to build 2 partial prototypes, and they had to be immediately dismantled because Kaiser's Germany had capitulated. The Treaty of Versailles put a cross on the army, but the designers remembered. A super-heavy breakthrough tank is feasible. It's not a dream, it's an engineering task. They simply ran out of time. The seed was sown. Grosstraktor, 1929. Now this is a real detective story. The Treaty of Versailles forbade Germany from having tanks. What do the Germans do? Correct, they call them large tractors and secretly build them at Krupp and Rheinmetall factories. And they test them at the Kama Proving Ground in the Soviet Union.
Yes, you heard right. Future adversaries exchanged technologies while politicians pretended to be friends. The vehicle received a fully rotating turret with a 75mm gun. By the standards of 1929, a serious statement. It was here that the Germans felt out the shape of a true heavy tank. Neubaufahrzeug, also known as NB.FZ, 1934. 3 turrets. 3! The main one, with a twin mount of a 75mm and a 37mm gun, plus 2 small machine gun turrets. Only 5 were built. To be honest, this was the German answer to the Soviet T-35, a parade vehicle, beautifully shown in film shoots and in Norwegian fjords for propaganda, but in real combat, it would fall apart from the first serious hit. The multi-turret scheme proved to be a dead end. Too complex, too heavy, too much crew. The Germans realized this faster than others, and they began searching for a different path. Durchbruchswagen II, also known as DW2, 1940. Here it is, the first true progenitor of the Tiger. Literally, breakthrough tank. The Henschel company threw multi-turret fantasies into the trash and proposed a classic. 1 hull, 1 turret, 50mm of armor all around, serious for the time. 30 tons, a reasonable layout, handling an order of magnitude better than its predecessors. It was on the DW2 that suspension and transmission components were perfected, which would later migrate to subsequent machines. This is not just a prototype, it is a technical testament that Henschel engineers would pass on to the next generation, and the next step would be far more ambitious. VK 65.01H, period from 1939 to 1941. An assault monster for breaking fortified lines, specifically the French Maginot Line. 65 tons, armor up to 100mm. For the time, it was a true bunker on tracks. But here, a historical anecdote occurred. The French capitulated in 6 weeks, faster than the Germans could finish the tank. The project was closed. However, all calculations regarding weight, armor, and load on the running gear neatly went into the archive, and later proved very useful. Sometimes the most useful developments are those that never made it to the front. VK 36.01 H, 1941. Here, the Germans decided to play alchemy. On this vehicle, they first tried a conical gun with a tapering barrel. The bullet accelerated to insane speeds and pierced armor like cardboard. It sounds fantastic, but there is one nuance. Such a gun required tungsten, and in wartime Germany there was a pittance of it. The scarce metal went to machine tools and cutters, not tank guns. The project was reformatted. The conical gun was removed, but the frontal armor was increased to 100 millimeters, and the overall hull geometry was refined. The chassis of this vehicle essentially became the draft for the Tiger. Tiger I, also known as Panzer VIII Maus, 1942. Here it is, the legend, the one. 56 tons of vertical armor plates, an 88mm KWK-36 gun, the very one, adapted from an anti-aircraft gun, which on the Eastern Front was already knocking out Soviet tanks from a distance of 1.5 kilometers. Allied crews reported on it with superstitious horror. But what do we get in fact? The machine was terribly expensive, complex to produce, and finicky to maintain. The gearbox required surgical precision when shifting, otherwise, seizure. 1,347 tanks were produced, a negligible number for a war of such scale. The Allies feared individual units, while the Germans pretended they had thousands. VK 45.02, P. 1942. A parallel story that is usually hushed up. Ferdinand Porsche, the one with the cars, proposed his own Tiger with an electric transmission and futuristic design. The turret was shifted forward or backward depending on the variant. The power plant, gasoline engines powering electric motors. Beautiful on paper. In practice, the engines overheated. Copper for the electrical systems was in short supply. Reliability tended towards zero. It did not go into series production. But the hulls that had been cast, about 90 of them, were converted into Ferdinand assault guns. The very ones that near Kursk got it from Soviet infantry for lacking a machine gun. History does not tolerate unfinished projects. Tiger II, also known as Königstiger, the King Tiger, 1944. The Germans looked at the Soviet T-34 and said, "Good idea with the sloped armor, we'll take it." 68 tons, rational armor angles, and the long-barreled 88mm KWK-43 gun. Now a completely different story, not an anti-aircraft adaptation, but a specialized tank monster. It could penetrate any tank of its time at a distance of 2 kilometers. Any, without exception. But the weight killed maneuverability for good. Bridges in the west and muddy roads in the east became a trap for it. This is part 1 of 2. 377 machines rolled off the assembly line and mostly ground to a permanent halt due to breakdowns and fuel shortages, not enemy fire. VK 70.01 Löwe, Lion, 1942. Krupp proposed an intermediate link between the King Tiger and what was to come next. 70 to 90 tons, a 100 to 105 millimeter gun, several design variants, the Light Lion and the Heavy Lion. The project remained on paper. Hitler personally axed it in favor of even heavier vehicles. The logic was simple. If you can make it heavier, why stop? In reality, a classic case where a leadership whim kills a sensible engineering compromise. The Lion was realistic, precisely why it was never built. Panzer VIII Maus, 1944, 188 tons. The heaviest tank ever embodied in metal on planet Earth. Armor up to 240 millimeters all around. A twin mount of a 188 millimeter and a 75 millimeter gun. This was no longer a tank. It was a moving fortress. Porsche was back in business. 2 prototypes were built. And here comes my favorite moment in this entire story. The tank could not cross a single European bridge. Not one. The solution? Rivers were to be forded along the bottom in pairs. One Maus supplies power to the other via an electrical cable while the first crawls underwater. This isn't engineering, it's the poetry of absurdity. Entwicklung Serie E75, 1945. Against the backdrop of the Maus, this project looks like a manifesto of common sense, albeit a belated one. The E-Series, a program of unification and standardization, the German industry's attempt to escape the chaos. The E75 was conceived as a replacement for the King Tiger. The same armor, the same gun, but with unified components and suspension shared with other vehicles in the series, primarily the E50. Cheaper, more reliable, simpler to produce. Had the Germans started down this path 2 years earlier, history might have been different. But they started in 1945, when the factories were already being bombed around the clock. Entwicklung Serie E100, 1945, and the final chord, 130 to 140 tons, a technologically advanced alternative to the Maus with a rational layout and hydrodynamic transmission. The Germans managed to assemble the chassis, without a turret, and abandoned it during the retreat. The Allies found this colossus and scratched their heads for a long time. No factory of the victorious side produced anything like it. The E100 chassis is the tombstone over the grave of the German armored school. They lost the war, but they died with panache. German heavy tank manufacturing is a story of how engineering genius consistently strangles itself under the weight of its own ambitions. Each generation of vehicles was objectively more powerful than the last, and simultaneously less applicable to real warfare. The Tiger could do everything. The Maus could do nothing. Between them, 30 years of design evolution that ultimately ran up against the physics of bridges and the logic of supply. Iron defeated itself. And what do you think? If the Germans had focused on mass-producing the King Tiger instead of the Maus and E100, would it have changed anything on the Western Front? Write in the comments, it's always lively there. This is part 2 of 2.